It's hard to know where to start with ethics, because it's not about law, it's about how you should act. It's giving you a guidance on the grey areas. In the UAE, in the media, we operate under the press and publication law. That's very simple. It's a very old law, but it's very clear. And we know where we stand. Hello?
Mic is okay?
Oh. Dodgy mic?
No, it's okay, that is. It's okay.
Thank you. Hello? Good. On we go. Ethics was always a bit grey. We didn't know where we were. Some of us tried to behave more ethically. There was no requirement on us. And then a few years ago, the UAE Journalists Association wrote and drafted a UAE Journalists Code of Ethics. And it went round 2 or 3 times, much discussion, and eventually all the editors-in-chief of the newspapers and the TV stations signed up to it. So there is a document. It's available at gulfnews.com, way down the bottom, and if you're going to go and check it out, on exactly what the UAE media organizations have signed up to. Now, the question is, do they enforce it? Do they really care? Or do they ignore it? But it's there in writing, and some companies have said, yes, we will make it a part of the job. We ask our employees to read it, and we do use it. So there's a code there. Now I'm going to do some of the points which come up there. Some of them are a little more broad. Like the first one is not really on that code. It's more a bigger issue. Working in a newspaper, you have a huge range of choices. So one of the most difficult things is, why run a story in the first place? Is it unfair? You have one company which has just gone down. Our business reporter comes in and says, this guy's going down. The banks are closing in on him. And a friend of his comes and says, why pick on this guy? 3 others have gone. You missed those, and you're going to aim on this guy. By publishing this story, the banks will certainly grab him. He'll have to run to Mumbai, sort out, and come back, maybe. So you're left with these kind of questions. Is it right to run the story? Or is it wrong because you know that it's there? Or is it wrong to run the story because we don't have complete knowledge, and it's not fair to single one company because of our ignorance of the other 4? The answer in that case was, we ran the story. And the company went down. And it rebuilt itself. Some of them are slightly more complicated. We had an issue, in terms of photography, we had an issue where we spoke to some students of a college, and they were doing all sorts of interesting, exciting things. And this was some years ago. And we put it into Friday magazine, and they were all very happy. Everybody, faculty, it was Abu Dhabi campus of Zayed. Everybody's very happy. There was no problem. The students were happy. Faculty was happy. We ticked and ticked and ticked every single box we could think of. The editor of Friday realized that this particular student, one of the women who had done such a good job, we had a particularly good picture of her, and she was good looking. So the editor put her on the cover, which means that this young woman's picture appeared in the newspaper in the promo ad for Friday on Wednesday. Then all hell broke loose. Family calling me, how the hell can you do this picture? We didn't agree, what's going on? Eventually the uncle calls in the afternoon and says, this is completely wrong, you've intruded on her privacy, you've done all sorts of things. And finally it emerges that actually the family were not terribly sure, in fact they were very sure, that the fiancé would treat it as a complete disaster. And so on Wednesday evening, I was fairly clear from everything I was hearing down my phone that I just destroyed a young couple's marriage, potential marriage. And I actually thought, can we reprint the magazine? It's not easy to rip a magazine apart and reprint it. I felt bad. But the answer was no, we couldn't. So we printed it. Saturday, hundreds of phone calls of congratulations. The fiancé was happy. And everybody was relaxed. So where do you go with these kind of problems? And that's the stuff which we dance around so much. It's a mixture of social, it's a mixture of conduct, and fundamentally it's a matter of being decent. Picture touch-up, we're just talking about picture. We have made a commitment that every picture does not get touch-up. Every picture is as is. But in the magazines, there are certainly touch-up. A beautiful woman is made even more beautiful by someone rubbing out that unfortunate little red pimple when an actress gets a picture. So, is that wrong? But we have not committed to that. We've committed to news pictures. News pictures will be as is. So a news picture can be pretty shaky in quality. We have a problem with that because we look now for quality pictures. The pictures 20 years ago were pretty ropey. And it was okay to have a fuzzy picture. Now we've got better printing, we've got better photographers, we look for good quality pictures. But an event justifies a good news picture. You know, if you have a blurred body flying out of a skyscraper, that picture is worth printing, even though you can't really see what's going on. The caption will explain the news item. But we will not touch it up. We will not then. We had a problem once when one of our photographers said, look, we've got all these shapes. We have a very strict understanding in the newspaper that we have a very coded relationship on how we manage the leadership's pictures. Now, Sheikh Khalifa, if he was ever seen, is obviously top. Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed is next, Mohammed bin Rashid, and we work down in a kind of order of precedence. And if they're all active and they're all busy, our front page goes to hell because they've all got to be there. But there was one Eid when they were all there, and we knew that they'd been there, and we knew that they'd all sat on that sofa, but unfortunately they'd sat there at different times. So the question was, if we just cut one of them and put him in, we've got one picture which says leaders celebrate Eid, and we've got a normal page. We did not do that. We did not tweak the news, even though that had happened. Headlines. We have endless problems with headlines. We spend hours making the stories firm. We have hours checking through. Sometimes they get sent back frequently, they get rewritten, and we know that the facts are there, we know that the quotes are there, we know that they were solid on that, check. Then it goes to page. And a sub who may not have seen that story writes a headline. Dramatic, overdone. Now, so we can easily, a headline is supposed to be dramatic, it's supposed to catch your eyes, but it can also grossly overinflate a story. We then come to the tricky area of behavior. One of the key parts of behavior is gifts. Some people call them bribes. And the Code of Ethics requires journalists not to accept valuable gifts. We then hit a problem because people argue, oh, it's the culture, we always give gifts, we always give people a nice time. And so, roughly, we do not see it as wrong for a reporter to go somewhere and in a press conference get given a modest takeaway of a pen or something or other. But if it is a large item, we see that as wrong. And some companies like to use that to encourage reporters to come, and they use that to encourage reporters to give them good coverage. We had a problem with Dubai Shopping Festival and Dubai Summer Surprises, because they had a habit of giving a large cash gift to reporters who'd been on the Summer Surprise beat or the Shopping Festival beat at the end of the season. And when that cash gift is more than a monthly salary, you suddenly have intense competition next summer. I must do that story. I really want to do the Summer Surprise story. And for sure, I mean, it's not as though we're going to rip apart the seamy side of the Summer Surprises. We're doing a normal job on it. But we found that wrong. We spoke to those organizations and said, we don't like these gifts. They said it's how we work. And we said then, in which case, if you insist on giving, we will ask these reporters to give it to charity, which broadly we've succeeded in doing. But it is difficult weeding that stuff out when government bodies see it as their natural way of operating in generating goodwill and just sort of doing their normal thing. And when corporates join in and see, well, we might as well jump on the gravy train too. In a newspaper, at least, it's fairly clean, roughly. You're not going to get too much. It gets much more murky around the magazine territory. The magazines necessarily are in touch with corporates in a fairly close manner. For example, Wheels, or any, I should say, any, I don't know specifically, so I shouldn't be talking about any particular one magazine, but an automotive magazine must be given cars to test. So the editor of an automotive magazine will always have a new car for 2 or 3 weeks, and there's an endless changing variety of cars. So if you want to drive a Rolls Royce, you talk to the editor of the magazine, he gives you a Rolls Royce for a day or two because he's got it for 3 weeks. And then the next time it's a Lamborghini, next time the poor chap gets some normal little car because he's doing down market cars, then you're back on the top end. Now, because an automotive magazine needs that, there's a relationship there. But because it's being given, does that editor feel any obligation to write about it in a particular way? When you're Clarkson, and when you've got the authority and independence to write what you want, and you can get a car given to you, and you rubbish it, and the company comes back with their next model, you've got it right. I don't think any of us in the Middle East have quite got to that level. But, and that revolves, I mean, I'm talking about automotives because it's one example, but it crossed the whole beauty, so many different examples of there. Some of the IT magazines, or anything writing about technology, handhelds, phones. Again, the companies will give people examples of these. Are they really going to rubbish them, say this is a complete disaster? So it's difficult to both be clear and also have a very clear understanding. It's difficult to write good stories, but at the same time be clear enough to say we want the relationship, but it has to be balanced. I'm jumping from thing to thing. Quotes. We have a clear, very hardcore rule that you never fake a quote. You never change a quote. And that's a basic of any journalism. So if someone says XY, you write XY. But what if the guy speaking is an Arab, as many, many government officials here are, and doesn't speak English very well? So we then massage his quote to the correct English grammar, saying that we want to do him justice in a language he doesn't speak very well. He's a very coherent guy, he's running a very complicated department, but in Arabic he would be saying it in a particular way. Therefore, if he would say it in English, he would say this. The problem with this kind of thing, obviously, is you're breaking the basic rule, but you're trying to do it with good intention, and the only way you can see through it is by not changing the sense of what he said. But it is a difficult game. The other one is that when you're writing a story, and it's not huge chunks of quote, it's literally, when David Cameron spoke in a very angry mood at this meeting, he said, quote, "You guys are all rubbish," end quote. You're fitting that quote into a sentence, so the grammar has to fit the sentence. So sometimes you massage there as well. Now, that is, I think, on the edge of what we can do. And again, you shouldn't change the sense. But the guide to how we handle that is don't change the sense of what's there. We've never had a problem with this. We have had a problem with a guy who simply faked a quote. And when this story blew up in my face, I was the editor. It was a dodgy water company in Ajman, and they were taking big, whatever they are, gallon Masafi bottles, filling them from the tap, putting a new plastic on the top and selling them as mineral water. And we had them, and we wanted to expose them. But unfortunately, we made two mistakes. One was, we didn't get a third party to come and look at when we opened the bottle, the third party wasn't there. We didn't ask the municipality to come and be the third party. And secondly, the reporter wrote something which he thought the owner wanted to say. The owner naturally resisted this. When I discovered the quote wasn't genuine, and the reporter told me, I think he wanted to say it, we had a disaster. We were taken to court and we lost it because we couldn't prove the point. We didn't get the third party presence. And the reporter lost his job for faking the quote. So it can all go wrong, and we don't always get it right. Plagiarism. This happens a lot. People taking other people's work and treating it as theirs. Now, is there a grey area here? Sort of. But in principle, if you take someone else's work and build on it, it's fine. It's what you're supposed to do. But you have to source it. And in a competitive scene like ours, where we've only got 2 or 3 rivals, we are loath to say, in that interesting story in the Khalij Times, they reported this, we have now got one step better and we're telling you that. So you'll often see the phrase, in another paper or something like that. If it's a direct exclusive, we have to quote that paper. And so often we'll do it from Khalij or Ittihad, and we'll say, in Al-Khalij, they said this, and we now report in reaction to a Khalij story, we take it forward. So taking a story forward is not plagiarism. You source it, and you're open. What is plagiarism is taking large chunks of text and passing it off as your own work. And with the internet, it's very easy to find relevant content very quickly. I write a political column every Thursday, and in that, I'm either writing my own thoughts on a particular issue, which is there, or sometimes I'm taking 2 or 3 different people and then adding my own thought. Each of those people needs to be sourced. Each of those people needs to be very clear, so-and-so says it from the political side, so-and-so says it from a think tank, so-and-so wrote here, and I think something else. And then, because it's clear and easy, people can find it, people can track it down. We as and this is a bigger issue in the whole business of journalism, I don't think any one of us is the single answer. Possibly, at some stage, journalists thought they were. Possibly when you controlled the news flow in a print product, and that's basically all you saw, apart from a dodgy 9 o'clock news thing, you thought you were the single source. Now, because everybody's connected and everybody has multi-source, no. So all you can do in a news story is say, I know this, this, and this has happened, and allow people to do their own research. So you need to give other routes back, other sources, so that people can follow up the story on their own if they're interested. I'm not talking about rival journalists, I'm talking about readers. Readers are often very much more interested in these things than we are. It's their own business, it's their own interest, and they will follow up very quickly and go to the same. So if you find an interesting source, we do not keep it secret. We say this is the source, and go and find it. And that's an important way of how we work. So we act as a funnel through which other people can find those questions. It also applies to design. Plagiarism in design is sometimes easier to find because if, as happened, another newspaper simply stole a cartoon which our artist had written, it's very clear. We know that we had that cartoon, we know that it was written, printed in our paper, and we know that it appeared a week later in another paper. So you can prove it quite easily. It's more difficult to prove these things when they're sort of cut and pasted or when they're electronic. For example, the story 2 or 3 days ago we had on the yet another concourse in Dubai Airport. A complicated map appeared. It was basically a Google map of the area and some of our artwork attached. So there's no problem there in taking that from Google Map. There's no problem in marking it up and saying this is Concourse D. My problem with that was it wasn't very clear. Google Map is an image, and we really needed a sketch, and someone didn't quite go far enough and write a clear sketch of that increasingly complicated airport. Sorry. One of the delicate things about this is that, hello, busy messing up my wires, is that it's not clear if the courts support how the industry operates. For example, Bassam Za'aza wrote, he's our court reporter, wrote a small news story of a particular court case a year ago. And it was a straightforward court report, nothing particularly remarkable about it. It was a 3-paragraph story. The Khalij Times reprinted it, word for word, under a byline, 4 days later. To my view, it was straight plagiarism, and we have a case against that. It's against various laws here. We went to court, and we lost the case. We lost the case because the judge argued that the court report was public record, and as such, it's available to anybody. Our lawyer failed to make the point that the court report may indeed be public record, but our report of the court report is our work. Those 3 paragraphs were our summary, possibly factual and correct, but they were our summary, and therefore the intellectual property was with us, not with the court. The judge didn't hear that argument from our lawyer and ruled with the Khalij Times. So we don't deal with that lawyer anymore. That's one good thing which happened. But unfortunately, the courts are still very murky. And this is a real problem, because when you have a fairly broad, necessarily quite broad media law or intellectual property law, if that intellectual property law works in conjunction with an ethics code, it's easier to know which way you're going to go. But the courts here don't necessarily have a law of precedence. They can make their own ruling every single time. And so there's a major issue to re-argue. I mean, it's an ethical issue, I suppose. One of the things we now know through bitter experience, and we deal with about, I don't know, 1 or 2 court cases a month. One of the basics we start at the very beginning is to say, we have no commercial interest in this story. Me, the reporter, the newspaper's owners have no commercial interest in these companies. We have to be that clear, because the courts tend to assume all stories are bought or for commercial advantage. Then we have to say, we wrote this story in the public interest. And you need to be very clear. That's partly what I was getting at when I first started about why run a story. We have to be very clear to explain, we wrote the story in the public interest. It is a good thing that doctors are qualified. It is a bad thing that a dodgy doctor does mischief to his patients. Therefore, we looked into this story, and we go on. So you have to explain this stuff very basically, so that particular hair is kept in, because every single time you deal with a new judge, you go all over the place. I'm going to pause at this stage and look for some questions. What I've been trying to say is that ethics are fairly clear to every single individual. They're not particularly clear to the community as a whole. And you're endlessly dealing with different interpretations. It was a very good thing that the UAE Journalists Association produced the UAE Journalist Code of Ethics. And it's a pity it's not more publicly aware or not more publicly enforced, because it gives people a general guide. And it's a particular pity that it's not part of the operating of the courts, because ethical issues like this often cannot be enforced, but when they stray into those areas where they are caught enforceable, it helps a lot. But we've come a long way. When I first came here in 1983, the whole situation was much more dodgy. And since 1983 to here, we've come a long way. So I don't think we need to be embarrassed about where we are. It's just how we're going forward. So, questions, I think.
We've actually got our first question over here, Francis.
Thank you. Thank you for the interesting talk this morning. Hello?
Yep.
All right. My name is David. I'm the managing director of a content development firm. We help corporates and government bodies. I'm interested in one of the points you made about the relationship your magazine has with corporates. Not related to my own work, but you were saying how you have maybe a moral responsibility if you're accepting cars from a car company to speak in a certain way about their products, right? So I just wanted to ask you, what about on the flip side, the moral responsibility, the ethical responsibility to your readers to really say something is crap if it's crap, right? I mean, no matter what the relationship you have with that organization may be.
Yes, maybe I wasn't clear. We have a moral responsibility to look to our readers. We have a commercial responsibility, or it's a commercial weight, I should say, to work with some of these cars, the companies. Ultimately, we should give a bad review if it's a bad car, or if the particular makeup is chemically dodgy, we say this makeup turns your face purple. Or if there's a callback and yet another callback from the same company, call back thousands of cars. So I'm talking about cars too much, but they're only one example. We report that even if the third time running this company gets... So we have a responsibility. Our ultimate responsibility is to our readers. If there's some very difficult commercial relationship, we may choose silence rather than rubbish. If it's absolute rubbish, which is a very unusual situation, we would probably write that. If it's simply not worth bothering, we don't bother. So that's probably the most honest answer I can give you.
Right, but given the court system and the risk, inherent risk of kind of dealing with these types of issues, you don't know if you'll get supported or not. I mean, is it? Do you feel? Do you take that into consideration when you write something or not?
No, in these sorts of issues, there's no legal issue. I mean, obviously, if we do a bad review, we need to be factual and correct. And also, this is another whole territory, yes. Let me just answer. In these issues, doing a review, particularly a negative review, you need to be very factual, very dispassionate, and it's not personal. And so, as long as we stick to that, it's okay. If I don't like this meal because I got the wrong seat, that is not a good restaurant review. So when you review a restaurant, you should be reviewing the food and the general service. You should not be reviewing your particular experience on that night. So it has to be less personal and more factual. In that case, we move on. The courts are not really involved in this.
My name's Stephen King. A question about role models and the state of the industry globally. Is there a particular country which is doing things really, really well right now? Or a newspaper or a publication which you would say this is the heroes for media ethics, apart from obviously the Gulf News?
I wouldn't hold ourselves up. I don't think we have such a role model. I mean, we're all operating in our own particular spheres. And I mean, no, I don't think there is. There are some examples of how you write stories, yes, in terms of covering stories. You know, we, for example, at the moment are sweating hard to try and get our stories to have more context and analysis in them. So you read an Economist story or an FT story, and they give you stories which you get the whole picture in 300 words. Why? Because they bother with that extra paragraph which tells you the background. So there are some role models in that sense. There are some role models in terms of design, certainly. So-and-so are very good, someone just introduced a new look. There are some role models in terms of photography and news, yes. In terms of behavior, behavior is strictly applicable to the local society. And so, no, we wouldn't look for role models on this kind of ethical behavior. We're aware of what ethics should be. We're aware of what we're trying to do. We're trying to move society in the UAE, made up of so many different nationalities and so many different understandings of what is right and wrong. We're trying to move the courts. We talk to the public prosecutor that he should change their policy on accepting some of these cases. So it's a slow old process, but no, there's no role model in terms of some starringly brilliant ethical type out there.
Move over to this side really quickly.
I'm guessing that having spent so long here as an editor, you must have had points where a brand or a company has come to you and said, your report's about yours and we hear you're planning on running this story. If you do, we're going to pull our advertising. Without naming names, obviously, can you tell me how you reacted to that?
Well, I can name a name or two. If we're confident, the key part is we have to be confident of the story. One of the problems is that we've got some very qualified editors and we've got some reporters who come in, and your normal newspaper in the UAE is made up of quite qualified people who can think quite well, and then some very junior reporters who go out to do the stories. There's a bit of churn on reporting, and so a few good reporters know exactly what they're talking about. A lot of reporters who are good people are still quite junior and are catching what they go. So you have to be very sure that you've got a good story. That's the first thing we would do. So in most films about the news industry, we stand by our reporter thick and thin. The reporter is always right. Well, important to check. Important to check first that he is right, or she. Then, when that is the case, one can look a little harder. We had a case when Emirates Airline went down in revenue. The airline made less revenue than the year before. The group went up. And when we published airline profits fall, Emirates were furious with us. At the time we were doing quite a few things with us. They pulled all relationships with us. So we replied saying, you have to reply quite formally to these things, and we replied back saying, it is correct what we said. The airline profit was less than last year. And yes, the Emirates Group, which we had but not in the headline, back to my point about dramatic headlines, Emirates Group did make more money as a whole, but you were saved by Donata and Alberta Bella selling lots of sandwiches. And we thought, as an airline group, the fall in profits of your airline was more important than the group, which we also had the subhead. They disagreed with us and said we're not having any more advertising. So I replied, and eventually I had to write to Maurice Flanagan. I replied saying, you make your decision, and it's a free commercial world. We will continue, and we will continue to cover Emirates as we always have done. And I'd actually done the effort to figure out how many stories about Emirates we published every month. It was about sort of 20, new routes, new this, new that, all over the place. So we will keep this going. Eventually, after about 3 or 4 months, they started coming back to us. But I tell you that story because it comes out in a good light for us. There may have been some others, but broadly, that's the tone of the stuff we do. We're in the fortunate position that we are the larger newspaper of the 3 English language papers, actually we're the largest of any paper, and that we can say, if you don't want to advertise with us, you will get less presence in the market. And so, using that position, we just say that. And roughly, roughly that's what we do.
So you mentioned in the deal that the magazines are a bit different animal compared to the newspaper. But when you think about these paparazzi culture, this dodgy, the celebrity, the magazines and articles. So where do you draw the line, whether those are ethical or not? Plus then also is that, do you think that these kind of magazines also kind of diminish the value of the proper, whatever it means, journalism?
There is a whole cult of celebrity news creeping in big time, and we're reporting that as much as anybody else. The UAE paparazzi business is pretty light. There's not too many people hanging around the gates of the palaces waiting to catch people sneaking in and out. They would be out of the country sharpish. So it doesn't happen here. The culture of the paper, therefore, is not that way. We did try and do it once when we spotted Benazir Bhutto here when she first arrived, and she complained and said, I'm just a casual person living here. She happens to be an ex-prime minister, but here she is just hanging out. So we stopped taking pictures of her going to the shopping mall, which we shouldn't have been doing anyway, really. Does it diminish? We do report from outside. For example, there was the UK has got a whole series of child molestation cases running back from the remote history of sort of 30, 40 years ago. And one of them was an accusation against Ted Heath, that he'd been involved, a very vague accusation. It's a pity that we took it so big, but on the day it seemed like something was happening. So you can get influenced by it in reporting that. The paparazzi stuff, I mean, our tabloid is full of it. That's what we do. Tabloid is all about red carpet, celebrity, gossip. Someone looked at somebody, someone smiled at somebody, the wrong person was on some wrong person's arm. It's a whole different world, that tabloid. And when we meet in the morning, it's good fun because I'm talking about different issues, someone else is talking about the business section, someone else is talking there, and then the alternative world of the tabloid is there, and some musician who I've never heard of has launched something new, and there's a big drama going on because they weren't in the right place on the particular show, and so it's there. So we do cover it quite a lot, actually.
The old chestnut about print media versus online. So I still get papers every morning, I still read online. And this morning I see something that says in one of the papers, it'll take me 7 minutes to read this article, which I thought was really interesting as well. So it's like, okay, I better time myself and see how I'm going. So what do you think now about the statistics between who's reading what? What's the future of golf news in the UAE and other broadcasts?
Well, I think the future of media is to move more and more into digital media. That's happening already. I mean, we sell 120,000 print copies. The readership, one can argue, no one's going to get the right figure on that. Times 4, times 5, I don't know. But we have 3.5 million unique visitors a month to gulfnews.com. So it's a large news website. Many more people see Gulf News online than they could possibly see the print edition. That said, I don't see a formal website being the way forward. gulfnews.com, bbc.com, whatever, are there as reference points. Increasingly people don't actually want to go to .com and check out what's happening. They want it to come to their tablet, they want to come onto their app. And so we've got about 20 or 30, no, across the whole group, about 40 apps of various kinds. Slash tabloid, Friday has a Facebook, there's many, to be honest. The tricky part is managing all that, because 3 weeks ago I was in Davos. I was reporting for the newspaper. As I reported for the newspaper, I produced about 2 or 3 stories a day and a column. At the same time I was tweeting, probably not as much as I should have been, I tweeted more the year before. At the same time, whenever I spoke to the desk, some of what I'd said would go straight up onto the SMS and the news flash. So news organizations around the world are being required to move, and this is nothing new, from a daily whatever to a flash culture. So you have flash, and then you do the more measured piece. And that's where we're going. People say they don't read newspapers. I beg to disagree. A lot of people read a lot of newspapers, but they read them online. Our challenge is not the fact we don't have readers. 3.5 million readers. And let me just remind you, a unique per month means that one person who comes in, whether that one person comes in once, 20 or 50 times, they count as one. So it's a very hard measurement. 3.5 million uniques per month means we have a lot of readers. Our challenge is how to monetize that. Our challenge is to persuade advertisers to pay, which is difficult, along with, I mean, we're not unique in this. And our other challenge is to tailor the content to that global readership from a newspaper which is used to a local readership. And that's a very big issue. But if I can share with you where I think we might be going, we syndicate from the FT. The FT have an annual gathering where they gather the 20 or 30 papers who take their content on a daily basis. And Caspar de Bono was describing how he took the FT online. The FT have a subscription system. You can buy the paper if you want, but the subscribers, to them a subscription is neutral. Whether it's print or digital, it's the same money, the same deal, the same code. With the same money that you get your thing through the door, you get it and you can go online. He foresaw the technology exists, he foresaw a PDF culture, basically. The technology exists now, but it's not quite there, for you, me, and all of us to have a piece of plastic in our pockets. We will come have our coffee and unfold the plastic to a page size. The tricky part about this story is that foldability doesn't yet exist. You don't really want to carry a piece of plastic. I mean, I can't walk around with this handily. But that eventually foldable plastic will unfold. Some buttons on the right, 4G connected, and you will have your newspaper page in front of you, downloaded. Obviously you have to pay, you do what. So suddenly, remember we've spent 200 years developing the newspaper page. We know how people's eyeballs land on the page. We know that people come to the picture. We know that then move to the big head, second head. We know how people move around the page, and we know that people like looking at newspaper pages. Call them PDFs. There's an art to it, and you can flip through a newspaper much more easily than you can flip through a website. Click, 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 click. You've got a quick look at everything, done. Most websites are quite klutzy in design. Complicated tops, lots of buttons trying to grab people's attentions, confused clutter, and then you get to a story you actually want to read, and you're trailing down through a long, what we used to call galley proof, going on down, down, down the page, text going on forever. Very poorly laid out in terms of eye guidance. You're required to move your mouse. There's all sorts of things to do when you read a website. So there is a very strong possibility that the relationship between newspaper readers and newspaper publishers, developed through clever page design, will survive into the digital age. It's good for us because we won't have to buy the paper. It's good for the trees. It's good for us because we don't have to have the distributors. We have 800 distributors who take the paper to you. If you had that piece of plastic and you just downloaded it, firstly, it'd be much quicker. And secondly, we don't have to physically move it to you. And when it's raining, you don't get a sodden piece of mush on your front door. So I think that's where we're going.
We have time for one more question.
Blimey, that's quick.
We'll have the opportunity to hang around for a little bit. This is a really interesting conversation that there's a lot more to speak about, but we do promise to get you all to work. We're going to go for a question in the back here.
Hi, I'm wondering, could you just shed some light from your side on state censorship of e-journalism?
Right.
Where are the boundaries? What can you report and what are you not allowed to talk about?
Well, we should be clear about one or two things. The UAE is not a democracy. It is an autocracy, where the rulers rule. And as such, the role of the press is different. His Highness Sheikh Mohammed, as Prime Minister, has been very clear that he has given us the right to ask questions, and he said so several times. His ministers have regularly failed to answer. And so, as in that situation, we do not have the right to insist on an answer, which is a different situation from operating in a democracy. That said, so we have to be very clear about that. I mean, what we are here is what we are, and there's no point in being embarrassed or no point in pretending it's something else. It's not. However, that doesn't mean to say nothing happens. In short, as I tell new reporters, we can tackle anything in the governance of the country, the performance of the government. If the government sets itself benchmarks and fails to get them, that's a good story. The police have said they don't want cars to drive fast on Sheikh Zayed Road. The police regularly fail to enforce the speed limits. That's a fair story. So the governance of their targets, and the UAE is very unusual. The government summit, again, a week ago and a year ago, set the country very tough targets, sent the ministers very tough targets. And those are public, and we can follow them up. But we do not talk about the government. The individuals in government, their competence are not part of our territory. So that's roughly how we handle that one.
I think we could keep going here for many more minutes, and I invite you all to hang out for a little while and have those conversations with Francis, but we do need to wrap up this morning, and I absolutely appreciate all of you coming out and joining us. Hope you'll be back next month, and Francis, thank you very much.
Well, thank you.
One last one. CM_Dubai is our Twitter handle. We're on Facebook, we're on Instagram, we're in all those places. Share the word, tell people you are our advertising, and hope to see you again.